1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, good evening, everyone. Happy Wednesday to you all. So let's get the joke out of the way first. Ready? Tonight, you're going to hear unimpeachable wisdom. All go, oh, good. Now, for those who've come tonight, this is VBS College of Jewish Studies, and tonight our guest is Rabbi Adam Greenwald. If you're coming to hear the talk for the school, which is Professor Mark Brackett, that's in the gym. That's in the gym. So you go outside all the way to the end, keep walking till you hit Ventura Boulevard, turn around, that's where the gym is. I don't want you to hear the wrong lecture. You might walk out with wisdom. So good evening, welcome. It's good to see you. A couple of announcements before we get started. Tonight, College of Jewish Studies is wonderful. We're very grateful to present Rabbi Greenwald. Next week, it's once again Rabbi Farkas and me duking it out. And the question next week is, can you argue with God and win? And the specific issue has to do with when bad things happen to good people, how we understand that issue. So that's next week. Rabbi Farkas and me will be joining you for that conversation. Then, Wednesday night, the 27th, is Erev Thanksgiving. I want you to stay home with your turkey and make sure nothing bad happens to it. And we will continue on the 4th of December and continue our studies together. So that's the schedule for the class. This coming Shabbat, Friday night, and then Saturday afternoon, Cantor Fox is welcoming a dear friend of his, Cantor Israel Rand. Cantor Rand is the chief cantor of the Great Synagogue of Ramat Gan, formerly the Great Synagogue of Tel Aviv. One of the world-class, internationally known cantors will be our guest this weekend. On Friday night, we'll have a very short service at 7:30, and then at 8 o'clock, Cantor Rand will sing a concert for us. We'll enjoy some amazing cantorial music and some of his reflections on the cantorate. And then Shabbos after lunch, we'll have lunch, and then after lunch, we'll have a conversation with Cantor Rand about the work he's doing in Israel to preserve the great cantorial traditions. He's a wonderful, interesting speaker with a great deal to share. So please join us Friday night. It's Shabbat Farbrengen, 7:30 for prayers, 8 o'clock for the concert, and then on Shabbos for the Shabbat Shiur at 12:30, a conversation with this world-class cantor and teacher of cantorial music. Shabbos morning, as always, there'll be Torah study, and everyone is invited for that. And then we begin the week, and next Wednesday you'll have Rabbi Farkas and me again. So welcome. I'm glad everyone is here. Try to get warm. Try to warm up a little bit. It's freezing cold. Temperatures have dropped to a frigid 67 degrees, and Californians break out their parkas and their snow coats and their boots and their snow shovels, so it's good. If you have friends in Chicago, anyone have friends in Chicago? Anybody have friends in New York? Anybody have friends Washington, D.C.? Turn around to the camera and gloat, because it's 22 below zero and they got 8 inches of snow. So, what? Yeah, it's been just awful on the West Coast and in the Midwest, on the East Coast and the Midwest. Let's begin together. If everyone will please stand, turn to the folks beside you and say, good evening, I'm glad you're here. Don't sit down. You're going to be sitting a long time, so stand up. Get a little air, get a little blood in your legs. Stand up. Put your arms around your friends. Gather them close. Join us in a bracha of learning. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kidshanu mitzvotav etzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Yaseh shalom, Yaseh shalom, shalom aleinu v'al kol Yisrael. Yaseh shalom, Yaseh shalom, shalom aleinu v'al kol Yisrael. Yaseh shalom, Yaseh shalom, shalom aleinu v'al kol Yisrael. Yaseh shalom, Yaseh shalom, shalom aleinu v'al kol Yisrael. Yaseh shalom, Yaseh shalom, shalom aleinu v'al kol Yisrael. And before we sit down, just a word of prayer and thoughts for our brothers and sisters in the state of Israel who are under attack tonight. More than 400 rockets fired from Gaza. The rockets have hit the outskirts of Tel Aviv. They've even hit the outskirts of Jerusalem, as far north as Beit Shemesh. This is serious. This is a very, very serious incursion. Thank God there have been very, very few injuries. Most people were hurt. The people who were hurt trying to get down to the shelter. No one's been hurt by the rockets directly. That's due, first of all, to the rockets are unpredictable, and the Iron Dome has taken out a whole bunch of them. But take a moment, if you have friends and family in Israel, give them a tweet, give them a text, tell them we're thinking about them, and we offer our prayers and hope that there's safety. Maybe a ceasefire will bring some peace to the land. Amen. So please be seated. This is a story that every American rabbi knows. Young woman sits in my office crying. What happened? Well, there's a story, you see. She was raised in a family without any religious tradition. When she met her fiancé, who was Jewish, she began to cultivate an interest in things Jewish. Started reading. She wanted to know what motivates him. Went with him to high holiday services, came to a Shabbat dinner at the Hillel Foundation at the college, a Passover Seder at his home. And slowly she began to develop a deep interest in this Jewish identity. So as they became engaged and began to live a life as a couple, she took a class to help her understand Judaism and its history and its literature. And she began falling in love, not only with him, but with the tradition that he was raised in, with Judaism. She began to learn Hebrew. She took a weekend away, a spiritual weekend, to learn how to say the prayers. She began to truly love Judaism. And so before they got married, she converted to Judaism, went to mikveh, took a Hebrew name, bought a tallis, started coming to synagogue. Why are you crying? Well, my husband and I, we went to his mother's for Passover. And at the Passover Seder, she said to me, you're not Jewish and you'll never be Jewish. A goy is a goy is a goy. Rabbi, she says, I'm the only one in the family that owns a Bible. I'm the only one in the family that can read the Hebrew side of the Haggadah. I'm the only one in the family that has truly spent some time preparing for the holiday. But I'm not Jewish? What do you mean I'm not Jewish? You told me I was Jewish. You were with me when I went to the ceremony. You signed the certificates. How come she won't accept me as a Jew? Now, what this poor, wonderful young woman doesn't know is that what she's facing isn't just run-of-the-mill short-sightedness and closed-mindedness. She has stepped right in the middle of an ancient debate, an ancient argument. What are we? Are we a family or are we a faith? You can convert to a faith, but you can't convert into a family. You're always going to be a son-in-law or a daughter-in-law. And if we're a faith and if we're a family, there are boundaries that identify us inwardly, but are those boundaries permeable? Can people come in? Will we welcome outsiders? Or will we always be suspicious of outsiders? Will we ever be able to accept outsiders? Should we accept outsiders? Should we recruit? You've never seen a billboard on Ventura Boulevard saying, come into VBS. Should we recruit? There are lots of people in the community that are unchurched. Maybe they would like to have a little bit of what we have. Guilt, cookies, warmth, Torah, wisdom, prayer, spirituality. What is the nature of Jewish community and of Jewish faith when it comes to outsiders? Should we welcome outsiders? Should we not welcome outsiders? Should we recruit outsiders? Should we not recruit outsiders? Are we able to integrate outsiders? Do outsiders ever become insiders? Tonight, our guest teacher is Rabbi Adam Greenwald. Rabbi Greenwald completed his rabbinical studies at the Ziegler Rabbinical School at the University, the American Jewish University, and today is the leader of the Miller Introduction to Judaism program at the AJU. He's done marvelous work in welcoming outsiders. I'm going to sort of tip off his position. But I've asked him to help us reflect on this great debate where it comes from, what its terms are, and how we might resolve it. Please welcome a dear friend, Adam Greenwald. Speak right into the mic or they'll yell at you.
Hi, everybody. I want to say, first of all, that I am only operating on about 10% of my brain because I have a 4.5-month-old daughter at home. And so you know a little bit what the last 4.5 months has been like. I think I have got a cumulative total of about 9 hours of sleep. So if none of this makes sense at all, I am blaming it on my daughter, and I'm sure this won't be the last time that I, as a rabbi, use her as an excuse. Right, Rabbi Feinstein? Yeah. I also want to say that it is an honor to be invited to speak by one of my greatest teachers. Rabbi Feinstein was the first rabbi I met as rabbi when I was a second grader and my parents brought me to Ramah family camp. We were not part of the synagogue. We were among those unchurched Jews. And here comes a rabbi who announces on the first day, "Hello, I'm Rabbi Eddie. I am Enchilada Hagadol around these parts," which is a title my father still uses for himself. Rabbi Eddie was the first rabbi I met as a kid. He was the last teacher on the last day of rabbinical school. He has been an invaluable mentor and guide to me, as I'm sure he has been to every single person in this room and many, many thousands more. So it is a great, great honor to be invited to speak here in your home. Thank you. This is the place where I live. This question that Rabbi Feinstein framed for us, this is the place where I live day in and day out. And I have to admit, it was naive, but it was not a question I expected to live with. When I was asked to lead the Miller Introduction to Judaism program, I was 1 year out of rabbinical school, 27 years old. I had been working for a year in a congregation in West Los Angeles on a grant paid for fellowship that was just a year fellowship. I knew I had to go. I was dating a woman who is now my wife and the mother of our 4-month-old child, and I didn't want to leave Los Angeles, and so I was tapped on the shoulder by another great teacher, by Rabbi Brad Artson, and asked if I'd be interested in leading this Introduction to Judaism program. I said yes because it kept me in Los Angeles, and I had basically made a life plan of saying yes to Rabbi Artson, so I was in this job, and I showed up on the first day of July in the year 2012, first day of July being the first day of all new rabbis' careers. And I had a class to teach that night and a program to steward, and I didn't really know what I was doing. I had one thing on my calendar during the day before I was supposed to teach. It was a meeting with somebody working in the communications department at the university who wanted to talk with me in order to write a press release about the fact that they had hired this young rabbi to lead the Miller Introduction to Judaism program. Nobody was going to read an article about this, but I suppose she had to justify her shekels like all the rest of us do. So I went to go sit with her, and she asked me for 45 minutes all sorts of questions about my plans for leading the largest program in North America, preparing people for conversion to Judaism. I gave her all sorts of ideas and big dreams about what I thought a welcoming Jewish community could look like and what a program of learning that led to that kind of community ought to be. And at the end of this 45-minute conversation in which I got to share my big dreams and visions, she turned off the microphone, the recorder, and she said to me, "Yeah, but off the record, you don't really think they can be Jewish, right?" She said, "They'll never get the jokes." And I sat there kind of stunned, like, where do you even go from here? And I said, "I suppose we'll have to agree to disagree." And she's no longer at the university, and I'm still there, and the program is about double the size that it was before. But I was introduced to a question that I live with each and every day in my work, which is this great debate that Rabbi Feinstein framed of how we see outsiders, how we see newcomers, and whether we as a community truly hold a consensus that our borders are porous and permeable enough to welcome in those who truly and sincerely want to cast in their lot with ours. whether we give it lip service, and whether we actually feel it in our hearts and in our kishkas. And as Rabbi Feinstein said, this is not a new question. This is not a function of 21st century Judaism living in the shadow of the 2013 Pew report that says we're all vanishing. This is a question which lived with us in the time of the Rambam, in the time of Maimonides 1,000 years ago. And this is a question that lived with us in the time of Rabbi Akiva and the Gemara 2,000 years ago. And this is a question which goes all the way back to Torah, to the very beginning of this people. From the earliest days that we were a people, we were asking questions about who is in and who is out, how welcoming ought we be, and to what extent does our survival as this vulnerable desert people living among hostile neighbors, does this sound familiar still today? How vulnerable we can afford to be in this world. And so what I want to do is I want to take us back to the first time we had this debate in a systematic form. About 2,500 years ago, which is a long time. 2,500 years ago, when the two sides fought it out over the question of who is in and who is out in the Jewish community. And I hope that by going back to that very first debate, it can cast some light forward into our very different era with very similar questions. So I'm going to talk for about a half an hour sharing this framework, and then we'll take a break for more cookies on the outside, and we'll come back together, and Rabbi Feinstein and I are going to have a conversation. And if you think I'm not nervous about that, you're crazy. Hopefully everybody got a packet that says the great debates, Ruth versus Ezra. If you did not get such a packet, you are more than welcome to come on up, and I will happily hand these. Pass it around. Thank you so much. If you don't wind up with a sheet in front of you, there are no surprises or secrets here. I will be saying the text out loud. In the time of the Torah, specifically in the time of the first 4 books of the Torah, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, and Numbers, what did you need to do in order to become a Jew? What was the process of becoming a Jew? Anybody know? You were either born a Jew or you joined up. You joined up with the Jewish family. You married a Jew, and that made you a Jew. There was no process of conversion. Nobody went to the Beit Din. Nobody went to the mikveh. Nobody even took my lovely Introduction to Judaism class. You want to be a Jew? You said, here I am. And that was good enough. Now, Abraham was 75 years old when he got the crazy idea we read about in the Torah portion last week, the anniversary of my bar mitzvah, who said, I think I'm a Jew. Who gave him their geshponka? Who gave him a hechsher? Nobody. He made himself a Jew. And his wife looked at him and said, you're a meshuggah, but I'm with you. And that made her a Jew too. And it made the whole crew of them Jews, the whole family that came from that point. And some of them married their cousins, which is not a terribly good idea. But a lot of them married people from outside of the family who definitely weren't part of that original Jew crew. And they suddenly became Jewish too. Think about the patriarchs and matriarchs. Think about Joseph. Joseph, the bratty little brother, who his brothers did to him what I always wanted to do to my little brother, sell him into Egyptian slavery. I put up a sign. I sat out on a lawn chair. But Egyptian slave traders never came to my street in Long Beach, so fine. He now made Aliyah, which is almost as bad. I'm very proud of him. You did have to be circumcised, first of all, if you were a man, which is very interesting, that the only mark of Jewish identity only applied to 50% of the population. Today, you're a Jew, not if your father was Jewish. His Jewishness is irrelevant to your Jewishness. You're a Jew if your mother was a Jew. In antiquity, all a woman had to be a Jew was with a Jewish guy. Joseph, in Egyptian slavery, winds up marrying an Egyptian girl named Asenat. She's not just any Egyptian girl. She's actually the daughter of an Egyptian priest. She's a preacher's kid, Dafka. He marries Asenat, and they have Ephraim and Manasseh. If you have sons at the Shabbat dinner table, you bless them in the name of two boys who couldn't be bar mitzvah at Valley Beth Shalom without going to visit the mikveh. That's interesting, right? They didn't have a Jewish mother. She didn't go to the mikveh. She was with Joseph, so she was Jewish, so they were Jewish. Moses marries a non-Jewish woman. Zipporah isn't Jewish. They have a son, and they name him Gershom, meaning I was a stranger. He's a Jew. Moses goes and marries another woman. A woman, he marries her in the book of Exodus, also not a Jew. And Miriam has some words to say about this. Miriam is chatting with her brother Aaron about the scandal that there's another non-Jew in the family, and God intervenes and takes whose side? Moses' side. Says to Miriam and Aaron, stop gossiping about your brother and take a 1-week time out outside of the camp, and then you can come back in and you'll talk nicely. If every Jew who chatted about somebody in the family who got involved with a non-Jew had to sit outside of the camp for a week, our sanctuaries would be quite empty. A lot of us have been guilty of that kind of gossip. But God takes the side of Moses and says, don't worry about it so much. In the first 4 books of the Hebrew Bible, if you wanted in, you were in. The great example is that we are told that when we left Egypt an Erev Rav, a mixed multitude. It wasn't just Israelites who left Egypt, as you well know. It was a collection of all sorts of people who threw in their lot with ours and said, if they're getting freedom, we want it too. And by leaving Egypt together, we all became one family. It's only in the book of Deuteronomy, in the last book of the Torah, that we start to get some rules about in and out. Take a look at the text on page 1, this first text from the book of Deuteronomy. When Adonai your God brings you to the land which you're entering to possess, and drives out before you the many nations, the Hittites, Girgashites, Amorites, Canaanites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites. You were impressed by how I did that? 7 nations larger and stronger than you. When Adonai your God has delivered them over to you and you have defeated them, you must destroy them totally. Make no treaty with them and show them no mercy. Do not intermarry with them. Do not give your daughters to their sons or take their daughters for your sons, for they will turn your children away from following me, and they will have a Christmas tree. And God's anger will burn against you and will quickly destroy you. Notice something very strange in this text. The Christmas tree, it was my addition. Trying to keep you on your toes. What's very strange in this text? We're told to do what with the people who we're dispossessing? We're told to kill them, each and every one of them, men, women, children, animals. We are supposed to utterly destroy them. And then what does it say in the next line? Don't marry them. What's the problem? Where are they? If you killed them all, you can't marry them. So it seems to assume that the very best thing for the Goyim is that they should all die, but if they don't all die, then at very least, don't marry them. Keep them far away. Keep them far away. Now notice, by the way, which peoples are explicitly under this ban to intermarry with? The 7 nations that are in the land of Canaan, which you are commanded to go to war with. This passage, which is used later in the halachic literature, out of context, the rabbis do that sometimes, to forbid all intermarriage, actually only refers to the sin of sleeping with the enemy. It doesn't talk about the friendly tribes. It specifically says those people you're going to war with, don't also get confused and take them for husbands and wives. Later on in Deuteronomy, no eunuch shall be admitted to the congregation of Adonai. Thank you very much, as though they don't have it hard enough. No Ammonite or Moabite shall be admitted to the congregation of Adonai. None of their descendants, even to the 10th generation. That means never. shall ever be admitted to the congregation of Adonai. This is because they didn't meet you with food and water on your journey out of Egypt, and because they hired Balaam to curse you. You shall never concern yourself with their welfare or benefit as long as you live. So there are the 7 nations who we're supposed to wipe out entirely. And then there are these other people, Ammonites and Moabites. And they are not supposed to get wiped out because we have a distant memory that they are somehow in the family tree, but from the branch that doesn't get invited to Thanksgiving. Does anybody remember a story that you were not taught in Hebrew school about where Ammonites and Moabites come from that might make them cousins, but cousins? We'll get there, trust me. Anybody remember where Ammonites and Moabites come from? They come from Lot. From Lot. You were going to read about this week in the Torah. Lot lives in a real bad city named Sodom. Sodom gets destroyed. Lot and his wife and 2 daughters make it out of Sodom barely. Lot's wife gets turned into a pillar of salt in one of the really strangest passages and punishments in the whole Torah. And Lot and his daughters are left alone. Lot's daughters conclude that the world has ended. A fair conclusion, because they just saw a city consumed by fire from heaven, and they say to themselves, I'm sorry for the people with, innocent, who've made it into this room innocent up till now, they say to themselves, we must repopulate the world, and how are we going to do it? We're going to do it with Daddy. And so Lot's daughters get him drunk and take turns sleeping with him, not something we teach to our kids in Hebrew school. And they both become pregnant, and they both have a child, and one names her child Ben-Ami, which becomes the father of the Ammonites. Ben-Ami is a pun on Ben-Avi, son of my father. And the other one is named Moav, which is a pun on Me'av, meaning from my father. Now, I'm quite sure the Moabites and the Ammonites didn't tell this story about themselves, but this was the story that we told about them, that they come from family, so you don't kill them off, but certainly the type of family that we don't want to have over, the type of family that we're pretty ashamed of, the daytime television part of the family. So Moabites and Ammonites are treif. They can live, but they can't become one of us. Not now, not ever. We ready? We good? Some of you know there's a problem here. Good, then I have something to talk about. Fast forward a little bit in history. Our people enters into the promised land, builds ourselves a temple. That temple stands for about 400 years until the Babylonians come along and knock it down in the year 587 BCE. We are sent into forced diaspora, into exile in Babylonia, modern-day Iraq, for only about 40 years, because 40 years later, the Persians roll down in their big, shiny BMWs, and they roll over the Babylonians and crush them. The Persians issue a decree saying that all displaced peoples are permitted to return home to their ancestral homes and permitted to rebuild their ancestral shrines, and that includes us Jews. And so Jews are permitted to go back to Israel after only 40 years away. And a portion of us go home. A portion of us stay, which is an interesting and different story. What it means that when we're given the opportunity to leave the diaspora, the majority of us say, it's very nice over there. We'll visit. We'll send our kids on birthright. But actually, we're very happy in Encino, California, or Babylonia in ancient Persia. Very interesting question. A portion of the Jewish community goes back. They go back under the leadership of a figure named Ezra. Ezra is trying to reconstitute a community after catastrophe, trying to rebuild a community after this great and terrible destruction. And Ezra comes to believe that in order to reconstitute his community, fragmented, displaced, traumatized, he needs to circle the wagons as tight as can be and push away the outside world, which has treated us so poorly. And so Ezra gathers up all of the returnees from Babylonia in a courtyard in Jerusalem. And he gives this fiery speech to them. He says, by the way, the Bible records that the day was rainy. It doesn't usually tell us about the weather, but I think it wants to set a mood. It's a dark and stormy day when Ezra preaches. He says, "You have committed an offense in marrying foreign wives and have added to Israel's guilt." It turns out we didn't come back from Babylonia all alone. It turns out that in 40 years of living in diaspora, we fall in love with the locals of the land. And some of them come back and are with us. This is a practice since the beginning of Judaism. We have always married people from outside, and they were welcome to be part of the tribe. God even said so. Ezra says, no. You have married foreign wives, and you have added to Israel's guilt. Make your confession now to the Lord, the God of your fathers, and do God's will. Separate yourself from the foreign population and from your foreign wives. And all of the assembled men shouted in reply, yes, we must do what you say. Ezra inaugurates a great purge of foreign influence from the Israelite tribe and from the Israelite home and from the Israelite bedroom. Ezra doesn't just say, we are forbidden to mix with the enemy, like Deuteronomy says. Ezra says you're forbidden even to mix with those people who love you enough to pick up from their homes and come back to a new land with you. This is Ezra's survival strategy. He says, this is tough, this is harsh, I get it, but we will make it no other way. It's one strategy for survival. And before we look at the second survival strategy, and you all know what I do, and so it's no wonder that I'm going to be sympathetic to the next page, I want to just give Ezra his due for a second. Where are the ancient Babylonians? Where are the ancient Persians? Where are the ancient Greeks and Romans and all of these people who came for us? They're gone, and we're still here. And part of it is because we knew how to put up a communal boundary. Because we knew how to say, we need to hold ourselves separate and not vanish into a world which has been trying to absorb us or trying to kill us, one or the other, for a very long time. I want to give Ezra his due. This strategy worked. But lest we think this is the only voice in the Jewish tradition, that the only voice about the non-Jews in our midst is a voice of prohibition, a voice of condemnation. I want us to see that parallel to this, not from modern sources, but from ancient sources, there was already a second narrative. Flip the page, please. The Book of Ruth is usually presented as a sweet pastoral fable about a nice young girl who's loyal to her mother-in-law and finds love in the end. It's a classic comedy in form, in that it begins with a death and ends with a marriage. When scholars look, though, at the Book of Ruth, really look at it closely and look at it on a linguistic level, one thing that they note is that while the Book of Ruth purports to be from the early days of Israelite history, back in the time when the judges ruled, back before we had a kingship or a temple, actually the Hebrew looks much more like the Hebrew of the time just after the Babylonian exile. That the language in the Book of Ruth seems to suggest that this text was written at more or less the same time as Ezra was conducting his purge. If we read it with that piece of scholarly information in the back of our minds, the Book of Ruth ceases to be a sweet fable and becomes a sharp-edged political polemic. I want to show you how. In the days when the judges judged, there was a famine in the land of Israel. So a man from Bethlehem, which is in Judah, went to dwell in the plains of Moab together with his wife and 2 sons. The man's name was Elimelech, and the name of his wife was Naomi, And the name of the two boys were Machlon and Kilion. They were from the tribe of Ephraim, from Bethlehem in Judah. Elimelech, the husband of Naomi, dies because he's unimportant to the narrative. She and her two sons remain. They marry Moabite women. Uh-oh. We know something about Moabite women. What do we know about Moabite women? They're a no-no. They're from the branch of the family we don't let into the house. These two boys, Machlon and Kilion, they marry Moabite women. Chas v'shalom. God forbid. They marry Moabite women, Orpah and Ruth. And they live there, kimat eser shanim, about 10 years. I like that it says about. Why does it say about? I don't know. Then Machlon and Kilion die. Why do Machlon and Kilion die? Because they're unimportant to the narrative. Also, their names come from the word machala, which means sickness, and kala, which means dying. So if you name your child sickly one and dying one, chances are they are exiting stage left sooner rather than later. So Machlon and Kilion, sicky and die, mazel tov, leaving Naomi without her husband or sons. So now we have an elderly Jewish lady and two Moabite girls who were never supposed to be married into the family to begin with. So she got up along with her daughters-in-law, and they left Moab, for she had heard in the plains of Moab that God had taken notice of Israel and had given them food. Okay, she's leaving now, going back home, but she's got a problem. She's got two Moabites in tow. Can't do that. So she and her two daughters-in-law left, and they started traveling on the road back to Judah. And Naomi said to her daughter-in-law, Go back and return to your mothers. May God deal compassionately as you have dealt with the dead, with you as you have dealt with the dead and with me. And may God grant you that you find comfort with another spouse. And she kisses them, and they lift their voices and weep and say, No, 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 we want to return with you to your people. And Naomi says, Turn back, my daughters. Why would you come with me? Do I have any more sons to give you as husbands? I am too old to marry again. Even if I were to conceive tonight, would you wait until they're grown and remain in chains on their account? Ew. This is, by the way, this use of the phrase, this is sidebar, this use of the phrase remain in chains is the first use of the phrase aguna, a chained woman, a woman trapped because her husband has disappeared or abandoned her without granting her a get. Will you remain an aguna by choice, unable to remarry as a foreigner in the land of Israel? Once again, they lift their voices and cry. Then Orpah kisses her mother-in-law one last time and departs. You knew Orpah was going to leave because Orpah's name comes from the word oref, which means the back of the neck. She's the Orpah who turns her oref. She is the woman who turns her back on Naomi. You also know the name Orpah because a dyslexic delivery nurse wrote down the wrong name when Mrs. Winfrey had just given birth. This is true. She was supposed to be named Orpah Winfrey, but the P and the R got flipped, and that gave us the Oprah. Naomi says to Ruth, Your sister-in-law has gone back to her people and her gods. Return with her. By the way, do you notice that Naomi tells Ruth to turn around 3 times? This becomes the origin of the very well-known fallacy that Jews are supposed to turn away a convert 3 times. Almost everybody knows that Jews are supposed to turn away a convert 3 times, and just like most things that almost everybody knows, it's wrong. There is a sermon in one place in a book called Ruth Rabbah, a collection of midrashim, that says, just as Naomi turned away Ruth 3 times, so too we turn away converts 3 times. The problem is that Ruth Rabbah is not a halachic source. It's not a legal source. It's a collection of drushas. It's a collection of sermons. And so this sermon wound up being the source for us giving a whole lot of converts a very hard time for the last 2,000 years. Was never intended to be. But Ruth said, Do not ask me to leave you or to keep from following you. I run the biggest program in North America for people becoming Jewish. I had 363 students in the program last year. We also franchised our curriculum out to 61 synagogues across 27 states and Canada, serving another 1,000 students using the AJU's curriculum. I work with a lot of people becoming Jewish. I stand with a lot of them together in the Beit Din, in the conversion room, together with Rabbi Stiebel sometimes, and I hear them intone these words, and each time it makes me tear up. Each time it makes me tear up. Ruth said, "Do not ask me to leave you or to keep from following you, for wherever you go and where you lodge, your people will be, and your God." Those become the classic words of conversion, and the two of them continue on together. Very sweet, very nice, makes us all misty up, except what's the problem? What's the problem? She's still a Moabite. And the Torah says, no Moabite shall be admitted to the congregation of Adonai, not now, not ever. So very nice, you went through a conversion, a treif conversion. And yet, the two of them continue on together. Let me fill in the gaps of what happens in the rest of the story. They go back to Bethlehem. Naomi and Ruth hatch a plan. Naomi's got a wealthy cousin, Boaz. She says to Ruth, go out in the field, see if you can catch his eye. She does that. Then Ruth comes back to Naomi and reports, I did it, I think he saw me. And Ruth says, he's going to sleep out in his fields tonight, as he always does when he's harvesting. Go out, find him at night, and go lay down next to him and uncover his feet, says Naomi. I'm not going to tell you what feet are a euphemism for in the Bible. Whatever happens overnight, the next morning Boaz announces that he's found a wife. So something good happened in the night. And Boaz goes, announces at the city gates he found a wife. There's some complications and legal matters. And the end of the story is wedding bells. So Boaz married Ruth, the Moabite. She became his wife, and he lay with her for the very first time. She conceived and bore a son. They named him Obed. He was the father of Yishai, who was the father of David Melech Yisrael. She becomes the great-grandmother of David, the king of Israel. You all know this. You know this story. You've heard it a bunch of times. But with that data point about Deuteronomy in mind, no Moabite is ever admitted in. And with a second data point in mind, that this text is not being written way back in ancient antiquity. This text is almost assuredly being written at the same time as Ezra is breaking up intermarried families. Something much more powerful begins to emerge from this text. This text which says, a Moabite, Dafka, a Moabite, can become a Jew. And not only can she become a Jew, she can become the great-grandmother of the greatest king ever. And not only that, but who comes from the line of David? Mashiach, Mashiach, Mashiach. The Messiah comes from the line of King David. Ruth, who should be excluded for being treif from the beginning, gives us our greatest king and eventually leads to the redemption of the world. And you, Ezras of the world, if you were to have excluded Ruth, if you were to have kicked her out and sent her away because she was a foreigner, what would you have denied us? You would have denied us everything. You would have denied us King David. You would have denied us the redemption of the world. There would be no Beit HaMikdash. There would be no Yerushalayim. There would be none of it. Is that what you want? Would that make you happy? This is a hard-edged piece of political propaganda. The Ezra program is going to destroy us because you think that by circling the wagons, you think that by building a wall, you're going to protect yourself? Oh, no. You're going to keep out the vital connections that ultimately can lead to a transformed world. Two sides of a debate. Ezra holds down one side, Ruth holds down another. Both of them make compelling points. I want to bring in one more voice into the conversation. At 7:45 we break, Rabbi Feinstein, or at 8 we break? At 8, okay, great. So maybe two more voices. The next voice I want to bring in is Isaiah. Isaiah the prophet. Isaiah was not one man. Isaiah was an office. There were multiple Isaiahs in multiple eras. You could be the Isaiah of your day. There are, scholars say, at least 3 Isaiahs, possibly more Isaiahs. If you are a Princess Bride fan, if you are not, is one of the greatest movies ever made, Isaiah is like the Dread Pirate Roberts. Those of you who laughed are film literate. Those of you who did not have your homework cut out for you. There was an Isaiah in every era. The Isaiah who lived right after the exile in Babylonia, who witnessed the return of the people and the purge of Ezra, Trito Isaiah, the third Isaiah, begins his writing in Isaiah chapter 56. This is from the start of his preaching. So he is preaching at the same time as Ezra, likely at the same time as Ruth, adding his voice to the conversation. I'm going to read this text, but I want you to be flipping mentally back and forth between this text and the second text from the Book of Deuteronomy on page 1. Should I remind you what it said, because you've been so ensorcelled by my words so far you've forgotten? Great, look on page 1. No eunuch shall be admitted to the congregation of Adonai. No Ammonite or Moabite shall ever be admitted to the congregation of Adonai. I want you to keep in mind the pairing of eunuchs and foreigners. Look at Isaiah. Let not the foreigner say, who has attached himself to Adonai, the Lord will keep me apart from God's people. And let not the eunuch say, I am a withered tree. Notice this unusual pairing happening again in Isaiah. Isaiah knew Deuteronomy, and he is responding directly to it. We're going to talk about foreigners and eunuchs. For thus says Adonai, as for the eunuchs who keep my Shabbats, who have chosen what I desire and hold fast to my covenant, I will give them in my house and within my walls a Yad Vashem. That's, by the way, where we get the name of the Holocaust Memorial in Israel. It's from this line in Isaiah. I will give them a Yad Vashem. What is a eunuch? A eunuch is a man who cannot have a child. And so God says, even though your line has been cut off, I will leave you a monument and a name which will endure. When the builders of Yad Vashem were deciding on the name for the memorial, they thought about the 6 million who were cut off, the line that could not continue, and they said, we will erect a Yad Vashem in their memory, a monument and a name to keep their line going on. I will build you a monument and a name better than sons and daughters. I will give you an everlasting name which shall never perish. And as for the foreigners who attach themselves to Adonai, to serve God and to love the name of Adonai, to be God's servants and to keep Shabbat, to hold fast to my covenant, I will bring them to my sacred mountain and let them rejoice in my house of prayer. Their offerings and their sacrifices shall always be welcome on my altar, for my house is called a house of prayer for all people. Isaiah is responding back to Deuteronomy. And Isaiah is saying to the Deuteronomist, you said that these classes of people were inadmissible. I say my door is always open. You say that the way that we are going to preserve ourselves in an uncertain world is by closing ourselves off. I say the vision of what God is trying to build in the world is a house of prayer for all people. Will the Ruth and Isaiah voice win the day? Will the Deuteronomy and Ezra voice win the day? This has been a question for thousands of years. This has been a question which is relitigated in the Talmud. This is a question which is relitigated in medieval philosophy. This is a question which is being relitigated on the pages of the Jewish Journal and the Forward today. This is a question about where we are putting our communal dollars, whether it's about keeping Jews Jewish by holding out the world, separating us off, or whether it's embracing the world in a more proactive way and welcoming in those who are now referred to as Jewishly adjacent. You like that? There's no more Jews and non-Jews. There's the Jews and the Jewishly adjacent. It's delightful. This is a question. I am not smart enough to have the single answer to this question. I'm definitely not. Maybe a rabbi has the answer. I don't think anybody has the answer yet. What I do think is that we Jews have drawn wisdom from the debates and discussions of our past so that we're not arrogantly trying to answer questions as though we were the first people to think of them. We study in order to be able to draw the lessons of the past to make slightly better choices in the present and for the future. So I think by looking back to that first debate, it gives us a framework to begin a conversation about how we preserve Judaism for the next 2,500 years, about whether the strategy is going to be the strategy of circled wagons or the strategy is going to be the strategy of open doors, to recognize that there are positives and negatives to both strategies. That's the conversation that we need to have. I've got 5 more minutes. I want to show you one more thing. Flip the page. On the back of the page is a text from the Talmud. It's a kind of ugly text, the second text on the page. It's a text that the communications person who interviewed me, who said they can never be real Jews, they won't get the jokes, it's a text that that person might have liked. It's not a text I like. Converts are as difficult for Israel as scabs or sores. As it is written in the Torah, and a stranger shall be joined with them, they shall stick like a pustule to the house of Jacob. This is, by the way, on the same page of the Talmud, in which the procedure for conversion is outlined, and in which converts are praised for their willingness to stand up and be counted among God's people. So there are nicer voices on the page of Talmud. I'm just bringing you the yucky voice. This yucky voice says those who come to be with us, to be amongst us, are a plague on our house. The commentary is going to have something to say about this. In the medieval period in France, there was a school of commentary called the Tosafot. It's a collection of rabbis who all had something to say about various passages from the Talmud. This passage has 4 different rabbis weighing in on it. And I want to invite you to this Tosafot with me in 5 minutes. Converts are difficult as scabs. What does this mean? Rashi says, it's because converts don't know the mitzvot very well and will therefore bring down punishment on themselves and will lead other people astray. What's Rashi's concern with newcomers to the Jewish people? It's a concern about dilution. Thank you very much. It is a narrative of dilution. If we have new people coming in who don't know the right way to do the mitzvahs, who don't know how to put the accent on the right syllable in the bracha, who don't get the jokes and don't cook the food the way that Mamala cooked the food, then we're all going to be sunk. That's Rashi's explanation of what's meant here. It's about a narrative of dilution. And there are those who explain that it's on account of converts that we have been exiled. As it is written, why is Israel scattered? Only to increase the number of converts. This is very interesting, and this is going to lead into what Rabbi Feinstein and I are going to talk about. This text says, why are converts difficult? Because our condition of diaspora exists in the divine plan so that we can go out and make more Jews. That's a very interesting take on why we're in diaspora. That's not the usual take on why we're in diaspora. The usual take on why we're in diaspora is mipnei chatatenu, because of our sins we were exiled. This rabbi says, no, it's not on account of our sins. We have been sent on a mission. We have been sent on a mission to be a light to the world and to bring people to Judaism. This text thinks that we should seek converts, and that work is difficult. It would be easier to stay home, easier not to worry about everybody else. But what can we do? We've been given a charge. That's interesting. Then the Re, another rabbi says, it's because they impurify the blood of Israel, and the presence of God only rests on those who have pure yichus. Rashi has a concern about dilution of practice. They won't do Jewish correctly. The Re has a concern about blood. He says, if they come and be with us, you will not have Jewish grandchildren. If they come and be with us, our families will be watered down and ultimately will no longer be distinguishable as Jews. He does it in the language of polluted blood, which I think for Jews living in the 21st century is language that it just can't come out of our mouths. Too many people have talked about us as impurifying the blood of their nation for us to talk about anybody else that way. So maybe this was acceptable in his time. I'll let Rashi stand as Rashi, first of all, because he's Rashi, and second of all, because there's an interesting conversation to be had about the ways that newcomers change what we think of as Judaism. I will not enter into the conversation with somebody who says this is a matter of blood. And then I want to look at the last text, the last piece, the last idea. This comes from a rabbi who is named nowhere else in the Tosafot. This is his one and only entry. He's called Rabbi Avraham HaGer, which means Rabbi Abraham the convert. Rabbi Abraham the convert says, why are converts difficult? It's precisely because converts are so well versed in the mitzvot, and by their exactitude cause God to notice the sins of those born Jews who do not do the divine will. Rabbi Avraham HaGer comes along and says, if you have people amongst you who choose this thing that most of us were never asked to choose, and study this thing that most of us, present company excluded, don't study in adulthood, they are going to point out our flaws. They're going to make us look bad because they know more than we do. That lady who said, but they don't get the jokes, I deeply believe that the insecurity that she's expressing is that she gets the jokes, but they know the Torah. She knows how to read the Sunday New York Times with a bagel and a cup of coffee, but they've opened up the texts and learned the mitzvot. And for that reason, they pose a grave existential psychological threat. Because converts ask us, born Jews, to look in the mirror and ask a question that maybe we've never asked before. And the question is, would you? Would you? When I tell people that I work with hundreds of people becoming Jewish every year, you know what the number one response is I get from Jews? Not how wonderful. What's the number one response? Why? What mashuganas want to be Jewish? Don't they read the news? Don't they know the world? Who the hell wants to be a Jew? That expresses and reveals a very deep insecurity in us. That ain't about them, that's about us. When you say, who would want to be a Jew? You say, well, I was stuck with this. And that raises a painful question. Because if we feel burdened by this, if we feel stuck with this, if we feel punished by this, then where does that leave us to go? Do we gather on Shabbos out of masochism? Do we teach these traditions to our children because they were done to us, so damn it, we'll do it to them? It's a deeply unhealthy way to be Jewish. And that question gets begged, says Rabbi Avraham Ager, by people who had a choice and who say, Hineni, I'm in. Your people, your God, my God. You see the conversation playing out 3,000 years ago in Persia and Babylonia and the land of Israel, 2,000 years ago on the page of Talmud that says both converts are a great blessing and converts are a scab. You see it play out 1,000 years ago among the Tosafot who wrestle with these questions of narratives of dilution, of questions of mission, of the question that I think we need to wrestle with of, would you choose Judaism? And if you can't answer that question clearly, is there something missing? This debate has existed for millennia. This debate continues today. And this debate provides a framework for us talking about what the next steps of the Jewish future can look like. I'm going to pause here. We'll come back together for a conversation.
Coffee and cookies, because we are Jewish. So there's coffee, cookies outside. Grab a snack, come back in. We'll have a conversation with Rabbi Greenwald. Thank you. Okay. Hi, good. Mazel tov. Wonderful. Well done. Hi.
That's what everybody wants to know, huh?
Cookie? we're going to review a little bit of it. Then we'll go into some issues, and we'll get some questions from them. And we'll finish by 8:45. You'll be home by 9:15. Your beautiful wife and daughter. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Is that microphone on? Check and make sure it's on. No, here, switch with me.
Check 1, 2, 3.
Good evening, everyone. Please come find a seat. We're delighted to welcome you back. Part 2 of our conversation on who's in and who's out. Good, we good? Okay, come on in, come on in. Have a seat. Great. Well, good evening. Thank you. First of all, thank you to Rabbi Greenwald for a wonderful presentation. Spirited and enthusiastic and lovely. And I know that he has lots of stories, but before we get to some of his stories of the contemporary challenges that he faces, let's go back over the material that he presented to us and try to go a little bit deeper for a moment. Let's begin with the one side of the debate. Deuteronomy, Ezra, and the Rashi, okay? And the question is there a virtue to having boundaries? Is there a utility to having boundaries? Why insist on boundaries?
I'm going to try not to frame every answer through the framework of having a 4.5-month-old, but it's the world in which I live right now. So forgive me, all of you who have already raised kids and many of you grandkids, and this is all kind of novel to me. There has to be a distinction between my daughter and your daughter, right? There has to be some distinction between this little cute bundle of life and many, many other little cute bundles of life, which are adorable and wonderful and not mine. Not my direct responsibility, my indirect responsibility. I feel responsible that we should live in a world in which children have enough to eat and safe homes to come home to, but I don't need to individually greet each one in the morning with a hug and a kiss. That would be a little weird. So I think that there is a utility to boundaries, to knowing who your people are, to knowing who we have primary responsibility to, because we can't be everything to everybody. We can't be equally connected with every one of 7 billion human beings around the world. And I do believe in the power of family, of which we are part as Jews. We are part of a family. So I tend to be, I think my card's already on the table, I tend to be a liberal on this matter. I tend to support more open boundaries and more welcome and inclusion. But I don't think that that comes at the expense of having any standards of citizenship or the sense of family and peoplehood that I treasure as a Jew.
So let's pursue that a second. So let's assume that we agree to the value of boundaries that are permeable. But how permeable? Okay? In Islam, if a person is willing to say Allah is God and Muhammad is prophet, you are Muslim at that moment. That's it. That's all you got to do. In certain Christian denominations, you and I have visited churches where the preacher says, if you're ready to accept Christ, come on down. And you come on down, and some of them spritz you, and some of you don't. You know, and it's a very simple procedure. And in our, at least in the program that you're leading, a person has to go to classes for 6 months and complete all sorts of requirements. How high should the wall be? How rigorous should the requirements be? What should we ask of a person who says, I'm ready to become a Jew?
So this is a question that gets asked to me a lot. What are the standards that I feel a person needs to meet in order to qualify as a Jew? And the answer I'm more and more giving is that I actually think that the people who are the hardest to convince that somebody is Jewish, or the the people who believe that the walls and boundaries need to be most firm are the people who are converting themselves. So when I work with somebody who is becoming Jewish, they sit down in my office and they expect to hear from me, Rabbi, what do I need to do in order to become Jewish? And I have taken to saying to them, I don't know. You tell me. What is it that you need to do? What is it that you need to know? What is it that you need to experience? What is it that you need to feel? So that by the time you get to the Beit Din and the mikveh, you are doing this with full integrity and a clear conscience. And they look at me kind of stunned for a second, like, Rabbi, you're supposed to be the one to set the program. And then they start talking. And they say, I think in order to feel Jewish, I need to be able to say the Shabbat blessings. Okay. I'm not sure if that would have been on my list, but if that's what you need to feel Jewish, then you need to know the Shabbat blessings. And Rabbi, I think that I really need to find a community, because community is important to me, and I won't feel Jewish unless I've got a community I'm participating in. Okay. 11% of American Jews say that they come to shul every Shabbat. 89% do not. But you say you need to come to shul every Shabbat? Mazel tov, great. You do that. Rabbi, I know I finished the class several months ago, and you say that I'm done and ready, but I just need a little more time to think about it. Wonderful. Go take a hike. Go sit by the beach. Go talk with people that you love. And when you feel wholehearted and ready, then you come to me. I think this business of the rabbi defining the standard and the Jew or prospective Jew rising to meet our standard, I think needs to be reversed. I think that we need to be placing more trust in the people who are coming to us with integrity and full hearts to say, what is it that you need and how can I support you? And to trust that adults can make decisions about their identities. So if somebody said to me, I want to be a Jew, and I think that I can do it in, an afternoon, I would counsel them to slow down a little bit, just like I would counsel a couple who came to me and said, Rabbi, I'd like you to marry us. When did you meet? Well, on the bus coming over here. But they would be by far the exception rather than the rule. The vast, vast majority of the hundreds of people I've talked to in my career about this say, I know, ultimately, and it takes some drawing out, I know what I need in order to feel comfortable in my Jewish skin. And I think my job is to help provide that for them and be less like the police and more a facilitator of them reaching their own potential.
So let's pursue that a second. There's a news story, and I'm not sure it's still happening, but there was a guy in Florida who had a Sunday afternoon conversion program, right? You came at 11 a.m., you registered, you started the class at 12. By 4, you were done. He threw you in the mikveh or the ocean, and you went home that afternoon with a Jewish certificate. What's wrong with that?
It's a good question.
Thank you.
What's wrong with that is I have rarely met a human being who can make a meaningful, lifelong commitment in an afternoon. There may be such human beings. Every once in a while, I meet people of generally an older generation who told me that they went on one date with somebody, danced with him, and just knew, and 3 days later they were married, and Rabbi, we've been married for 67 glorious years, right? There are a few of those people. There may be a few of those people in this room. They are the rare exception. Most people, before they can marry somebody and make a life with them, need to live a few seasons with them. Know what they're like in the winter, spring, summer, and fall. Know what they're like at their good days and their not such good days. Most people, in order to be able to feel comfortable making that lifetime decision, need that time. And I think that most people, in order to feel comfortable making a lifetime Jewish decision, need a little bit of time to do it. And so I am suspect of people who feel that they can make a commitment in an afternoon. I suppose that it may be possible, but I'm going to guess that the majority of the people who participate in such an experience made a commitment last year to be a Scientologist, and next year are going to be a vegan, and they're on a journey of making a whole lot of commitments that actually don't mean a whole lot. That's what's the problem with that.
So let's turn to the other side of the debate then, the side of the debate that, excuse me, demands more porous boundaries, more open doors. You indicated that there's a machloket, there's an argument among the rabbis about the impact on the community at large of welcoming in outsiders. That Rashi says it's a detriment because it dilutes commitment, and Rav Avraham the Ger, the unique Rav Avraham the Ger, talks about a different kind of response. In your experience, what does a large community of new Jews, newly minted Jews, bring to the community? How does it affect us?
We sunburn less easily. We've got genetic diversity is actually a real benefit. We have been marrying our cousins for a very, very long time, and that actually has some silly consequences, like my skin that could be used to signal planes to land at LAX. I'm a shade above vampire. And it also has some very serious consequences, as I think many of us know, that it turns out that marrying your cousins forever is not such a good idea. So a little bit of diversity in the gene pool is nice. I think beyond diversity in the physical gene pool, I think diversity in the intellectual and spiritual gene pool is nice. I think that we have come to a conclusion as a society, at least most of us have, that we do better thinking and better living when we are encountering people who are different than us than when we are in monoculture. When everybody is the same and thinks the same and acts the same and behaves in lockstep, bad things happen. When we have diversity of opinions and perspectives, when we have a number of different ways of looking at the same issue, there is greater richness in the conversation and more facets of beauty and truth. I think a Jewish community, which is a monoculture, where everybody looks the same, acts the same, thinks the same, and does the same because that's how all of our grandmothers did it in Poland, that's actually a problematic Jewish community. And I think our Jewish community is made much, much richer when it has people who didn't have ancestors from the same shtetl as mine. I say this, by the way, about Jewish diversity. When my bubby came from the Bronx to Los Angeles to visit me and Pico Robertson for the first time, she looked at all of the signs up and down the street and she said, "This is a Jewish neighborhood? Why is it full of Arabs?" I said, "Bubby, first of all, you're a little bit racist, and second of all, I mean, I really love her, but a little bit. Second of all, it's Farsi, and those are Persian Jews, and they're Jews, and they've been Jews for like 2,700 years in the same place. So Jewish community is better when there's two types of Jewish cuisine, the boiled meats that I'm used to, and the food that actually has a little bit of spice that I get from my Persian friends. It's even better when it includes people from Africa and Asia and Latin America. It's even better when we have perspectives of people who have been in church and mosque and ashram. I think that just makes us richer.
So let's one more step. So I want to push this a little bit farther. There is a phenomenon that we're seeing in the community of Jews of color. Jews who are not only from different cultural and religious backgrounds, but Jews who come from, as it were, physical, racial backgrounds. And how does that change things?
Well, so I'll tell you, somebody showed up in my office today who is just about at the 2-year anniversary of his conversion. He said, "I woke up this morning and I knew I needed to see the rabbi." Oi. He is an ex-Air Force pilot who came to the University of Judaism. I'm in the University of Judaism in how long?
You're tired.
Seriously.
You're really
Came
tired.
to the American Jewish University. Dr. Herbst, if you're watching. Came to the American Jewish University to do his undergrad studies starting at 25 after he finished his Army service. And as part of that experience, got more and more entrenched in Jewish community and ultimately came to my program and converted to Judaism 2 years ago. He is a 30-year-old African-American man, and he said to me, "I've been Jewish for 2 years, and I'm ready to stop explaining every single time I walk into the synagogue that yes, I am Jewish, no, I'm not Ethiopian, No, I'm not one of the Abu Yudaya. Mazel tov, I'm a black man who's Jewish. Can we now talk about something else? And the truth is I think we still have a lot of communal work to do to be able to make that a reality. Because it is still absolutely the case that people who have a little more skin tone than most of us in this room walk into a synagogue, and at least the first reaction is, who are you? How'd you get here? And that wouldn't be acceptable in any other space in which we occupy anymore. That would not be acceptable in your workplace. That would not be acceptable in your classroom. That would not be acceptable in your friend group. It should no longer be acceptable in our Bate Knesset. It should no longer be acceptable in our houses of assembly. They need to be open and accessible to people of every racial and ethnic background. If they say they're with us, Lord knows we need them.
Artie, you want to ask something? Rabbi, I'm going to repeat that because he didn't get onto the microphone. Rabbi Stiebel said that when someone says to him, "You don't look Jewish," his response is, "You don't look wise." I want the camera to get that part. I heard what you said. Wise, right? Right. That's what.
Well, there's a piece by a wonderful spoken word artist. That's what is now referred to as what was once called a poet. A spoken word artist named Vanessa Hidary, who performs under the stage name The Hebrew Mamita. And I encourage you to look up her poem. It is absolutely beautiful. It's on YouTube, and you can find it performed. And she tells the story of walking into a bar and sitting down next to a guy. And he said, "Could you go out on Thursday?" And she said, "I can't Thursday. It's Yom Kippur. I'll be fasting." And he looked back at her and said, "You're Jewish? You don't look Jewish. You don't act Jewish." And she said, and I just giggled. I giggled and flirted, and then I went home and I felt gross. I felt gross because I had somehow bought into this idea that looking Jewish wasn't looking cool, that looking Jewish wasn't looking sexy, that I had somehow bought into this idea that when he said, "You don't look Jewish," and it sounded like he was complimenting me, that was a compliment. She said, "Next time, what I want to tell somebody who says you don't look Jewish is you tell them you don't look, period. You can't be different than you. You can't let anybody tell you you are not of your people. You are your people," she says. And I play that for every single one of my students. And the third class of the 18. I want them to hear it and see it because somebody's going to tell them, "You don't look Jewish. You don't act Jewish." And I want them to look back at them and say, "Clearly, you don't look carefully."
But let's put it's a wonderful poem, by the way, and it's worth looking it up, and I'll put it up on the website if you'd like to see it.
I was once in an elevator with Vanessa Hidary, and I've gotten pretty good in Los Angeles about not being geeky around celebrities, but we were in an elevator together, and I have just I dissolved. "You're the Hebrew Mamita. You're so cool."
And she said, "You don't look like a rabbi." So
you don't look like
actually
a moron.
you do.
Yeah.
So you know. I heard her do it once with Craig. But let's pursue this just a quick second, okay? There's a structural problem. The structural problem is that we are both a faith and a family. Family means ethnos. You can convert to a faith. You adopt its beliefs, you adopt its practices, you adopt its way of looking at the world. You practice the faith. You become part of the Jewish faith. Becoming part of the Jewish family is much more difficult because joining anybody's family is a hard thing to do. The family will always have stories, and you weren't there when those stories happened, or they will have an inside language, and you don't know the inside language. And the metaphor of being a son-in-law or a daughter-in-law is an apt metaphor. So how in a program like this Do you help people feel not just that I'm practicing the Jewish faith, but in fact, this is my people, this is my family?
Right. So I like that you use the word over and over again, adoption. And I think that that's an important word also, because it is possible to join a family in a seamless way. The way you join a family in a seamless way is by being adopted. There is a special place in hell for anybody who tells an adopted child that you're different than a child by birth. That is a sin and a crime. An adopted child is the child of their adopted parents, just like a child who came physically from the body of its mother. And so I think that a Jew by choice has the right to be treated as an adopted member of the family, which means that it is a sin and ugly to say to them, and by the way, against halakha, to say, well, you're not really Jewish. We have a lot of communal tshuva to do in this regard. We have a lot of communal tshuva to do because, as Rabbi Feinstein started us out tonight, there are plenty of people who are knocking at our door. It's hard to believe, but there are. Many, many people who are knocking at their door saying, we want to be with you, whether that means by formal conversion, or that means by agreeing to raise Jewish children, or whether that means by agreeing to participate in a Jewish home, even if they're not 100% sure what that is or what that means. And when they come knocking, if the response is, even for a second, to slam the door in their face, how can we expect them to knock at the door again? How can we expect them to keep coming back to a community that always wants to remind them that they are of us but not one of us? I have seen and really experienced in these last 7.5 years directing this program some moments of some tremendous ugliness. I was confronted once in the parking lot by the father of a woman whose son-in-law, sweetest guy in the world, soon-to-be son-in-law, was converting to Judaism. Half Polish, half Filipino, is a cartoonist with Nickelodeon. And this man had tracked me down to a wedding that I was attending. He wasn't invited to the wedding. And he came up to me in the parking lot with his fists balled up. And he said to me, Rabbi, you are killing my wife and ruining my family by letting that one come in. And I said, first of all, you need to put your fists down. You are 5'2", and I am 6'2". Put them down. And second of all, I'm not ruining your family, but you have a very good chance of doing that. I'm helping a wonderful person become Jewish. By your incapacity to see that, you are driving a wedge between you and your beloved daughter, and between you and the next generation. So you can go ahead and ruin your family if you want, but I don't think that that's what you want. I think that you love your daughter very deeply, and I think you love her enough to grow. I think that conversation needs to happen in every synagogue and in every community around the Jewish world, where we make a communal commitment to seeing Jews by choice the same way we see adopted children, which is that we see no distinction between those who come to us later in life and those who are born amongst us. I think that's the first step to making the kind of inclusive Judaism that somebody might actually want to join.
I want to ask you about a very controversial issue that we deal with as rabbis, and I think the community deals with it in a much more emotional way, which is that person who isn't ready to convert, but joins us in a more informal way. The parent who helps parent Jewish kids, drives carpool, the member, the person who hangs around the synagogue but isn't ready to become fully Jewish for lots of reasons. Some personal reasons, sometimes they're not ready for it. Do we owe them the honor of giving them a status, a ger tzedek, a status, so that we don't simply think of Jewishness as a toggle switch? You're Jewish, you're not Jewish. You're Jewish, you're not Jewish. That one who is committed to Jewish life but not ready to become a full citizen of the community, do we owe them some sort of status, or is that a dangerous thing to do? You
have been an incredible leader on this conversation, and I think that we owe somebody who chooses to throw in their lot with ours, whether that includes dipping in a mikveh and sitting before a Beit Din or not. I think we owe them respect. I think we owe them courtesy. I think we owe them welcome. And I think we owe them gratitude. Somebody who chooses to participate in the Jewish family, somebody who chooses to perpetuate Judaism amongst their children, somebody who chooses, in a world in which most people choose to be nothing, choose to be supportive of this Jewish project, is doing an incredible mitzvah. And I think the more respect that we can offer them for what they do, the more gratitude that we can offer them for what they do, and the more love that we can offer, is certainly what they deserve. I don't believe in treating people as problems. I don't believe in treating relationships as threats. I think when we frame people as problems, when we frame relationships as threats, we lose lechatchila. We lose from the beginning. I think that we treat people as people. I think we treat relationships as what to be celebrated. I think we offer a persistent welcome. And I think that that's good for the Jews, whether somebody goes through a formal conversion or not. Does there need to be a named status for that person? Maybe. Maybe not. That seems to me more of a rabbi question, right? Because we like putting things into categories. We like having a term for it. I think that if we show respect, gratitude, and love, and we don't pay lip service to those things, we do it and we live it and we make it at the center of our community, then it doesn't matter so much what we call somebody. It just matters that we call them by their name and see them.
All right, let's get some questions. Anyone have a question? Billy has the microphone, so if you'll just raise your hand and wait for Bill to come by, and he hands you the mic. Let's ask a few questions and continue our conversation with Rabbi Greenwald. Come on down right here. Yeah.
Yes, I really like all of what you're saying. I'm wondering if there's what's the relationship you have with the fundamentalists, the Orthodox? They have that problem in Israel. You're converted, you still can't be buried in a Jewish cemetery. You know, there are those kinds of things that they have to deal with.
Okay, here's the question. The question is, we asked Rabbi Greenwald, what's his own relationship, or the relationship of converts to the Orthodox community, the more fundamentalist community, and particular the community in Israel, whether converts through his program are accepted in Israel or whether they're not recognized as Jews there.
So the question of acceptance in Israel, first of all, this is maybe the number one question I get asked by prospective converts. And it's really interesting to me how Israel has become the arbiter of who counts as Jewish and who doesn't. Because when I get a call and somebody says, I'm interested in taking this program, and by the way, Rabbi, I only have one question. Will it count in Israel? I always want to say back, I only have one question for you. What's your Aliyah date? Why exactly does it matter that the Israeli government recognizes your Jewishness? I'm not sure, but it does. For a lot of people, it matters very, very deeply, because it's the only institution in Jewish life. We don't have a pope, though I would vote for Rabbi Feinstein. It's the only institution in Jewish life. You already look good in a kippah.
A red one, yeah.
It's the only institution in Jewish life that has the ability to make a legal determination of who's in and who's out. So I wanted to say that first. Second, it should surprise you not at all that the Israeli government is a little bit crazy about conversion, because the Israeli government, or at least what will eventually someday again be the government of Israel, should there ever be one, yeah. Though my brother likes to say the government we don't have, I'm not sure how it compares with the government you do. The Israeli government is of two minds about this. There are two institutions in the Israeli government who govern who is a Jew. One is the Ministry of the Interior. The other is the Ministry of Religion. The Ministry of the Interior, by law, is required to recognize any convert of any denomination. Does that mean they make it easy on them? No, it doesn't. But they are required by law to recognize any convert of any denomination, and I sign about a half a dozen Aliyah letters a year. The Ministry of Religion, which is controlled not just by the Orthodox, I think we should be careful about this, it's controlled by Haredi Orthodox, the ultra-Orthodox, which bear as little resemblance to the Rabbi Kanevskys and Rabbi Yitz Greenbergs of the world as any two things could bear relationship. The Ministry of Religion does not accept any converts except for converts by a few specific Orthodox rabbis, not even all Orthodox rabbis.
Why in America?
They leaked the list about 3 years ago. That's it. So the conversation that I need to have with the people who go through my program, because I don't have a conversation with the chief rabbi of Israel. He doesn't take my calls. So I can't change him. I can support political movements to mean that he gets less power, but that's a political conversation. The conversation I can have is with the people who are becoming Jewish. And in that case, what I say to them is, you cannot become Jewish for anybody else. You have to become Jewish in your own eyes. And then you live into that. And the truth is no matter who you are, no matter what's your story, there will be somebody in the world who will reject you for it. And the only option is to live in one's truth. The only option is to live as one is and to say to somebody who does not tolerate that, does not accept that, what your grandchildren might say, which is, haters gonna hate. People who hate will hate, and there ain't no change in their minds. So I don't have a conversation with the ultra-Orthodox. I do have a conversation with people who are becoming Jewish, and I try to reassure them that if they're Jewish in their eyes, that's good enough for me, and that's good enough for God, and that's the best they can do.
Yes, please.
Okay, I was going to ask about Reform Judaism. Can you hear me?
That microphone
Can you hear me?
is only part of the live streaming system. I will repeat the question
Okay.
so we all hear it.
Do you feel that the Reform Judaism is more accepting of converts? Because we know of at least 3 couples where the one is a woman, one was a man. I think one, but there were 3. In any case, they did not convert initially, but they started coming to the synagogue, and now they're just amazing. It is a Jewish family, even
Okay.
though
So the question
parents
is,
not.
does Reform Judaism do a better job of welcoming outsiders than we do?
One of the things that I think that the conservative movement does well, and there's not that many, but one of the things that the conservative movement actually does well is we ask ourselves questions honestly. And we wrestle with those questions and we deal with them in the gray. That's why I'm still a conservative Jew, despite all the mishigas associated with this movement. I think that sometimes in some Reform communities, not all Reform communities, in some Reform communities, they treat this as though it is an answered issue. Everybody is included, everybody is welcome, and we don't need to necessarily have a conversation about it. And I think that that doesn't necessarily do a service to the ultimate kind of culture change that needs to take place. I think the place where the culture change around inclusion can happen is actually right here in the conservative movement, where we take the boundaries seriously and we also take the progressive values of human dignity and inclusion seriously, and we hold those 2 values up together and we insist that they don't need to be mutually exclusive. So I actually think we are well positioned as a movement to be wonderful leaders on this question and to have the kind of brave conversations that have long-term ripple effects. I think the Reform movement has done a great job of making inclusive Jewish community. I think there's still more work that needs to be done, and it's not sufficient to just say we've solved the problem by loving everybody. We need to actually work a little bit harder than that.
Hi. I have a three-part question. The first one is, besides intermarriage, what are the other reasons or why people want to go through conversion?
Yeah.
Secondly is, what percentage of the people who begin finish the conversion? And three, would you describe the curriculum?
Okay, so the first question is, what are the motivations for people to become Jewish? Number two is, what percentage of people who start the program finish it? And number three is, what's the curriculum? Yeah.
So the answer is, on a national level, we don't know. There has never been a significant national sociological survey of conversion to Judaism. We don't know how many people convert across the country every year. We don't know the denominational breakdown. We don't know the motivations. We don't know how many people 5 and 10 and 20 years out of their conversion are still living Jewish lives. One of my passions and obsessions right now really is trying to find a communal funder who is interested in answering some of those questions. So if you know anybody who likes data and has got a couple of shekels, I'd like to talk to them, because I think that until we know who we're talking about, we can't effectively serve them. That aside, I work in a program of a few hundred people going through this a year, so I can give you a snapshot of what I see. 52% of the people who sign up for the Introduction to Judaism program are signing up in order to convert. The other 48% are either Jewish by birth, and they may be taking the class to support a partner, or they may be taking a class simply to learn things that they might have learned had they been paying attention in Hebrew school, or non-Jews who are taking the class because they find themselves to be Jewishly adjacent, often married to a Jew, living in a Jewish family, and would like to understand what their mother-in-law is talking about and not feel like a fool at the Passover Seder. So 52%, a small majority of my folks, are headed for conversion. Of those folks, about 2/3 ultimately go on to convert. Of the ones who say they're going to convert, about 2/3 finally, in the end, do it. About 1/3 decides along the course of the process, for whatever reason, it's not for them. I consider both things a victory. It is a victory when somebody learns about Judaism and falls in love with it. It is a victory when somebody learns about Judaism and decides this isn't right for me or isn't right for me right now, and makes a choice that has integrity. So I don't get paid in the number of people who convert. I don't get a toaster for every 10. I see it as a program of learning for people to make informed choices. What the curriculum looks like, I teach an 18-week program, because 18 is a nice Jewish number, that is a little bit of everything. So a little bit of history and rituals and life cycle and holidays and big ideas and God and Israel, all packed into 65 classroom hours, which is both a very little amount of time to cover 3,000 years of Jewish civilization, and also a really incredible commitment by people mostly starting out in their lives. My median age is 33 in my classes. These are young professionals who have very limited free time, who make a commitment to 6 months of learning. That's amazing. And the fact that not just anybody does it, but hundreds of people do it a year, knocks me out, really knocks me out. Last question about motivations. About 2/3 of the people who I see who are converting are in a relationship with a Jew. That means 1/3 are not. That's a huge portion, by the way, and they come from every different background and have every different story. But it's slightly more complicated than that also. Because of the 2/3 who are converting together with a Jewish partner, in many, probably most of the cases, the interest in Judaism predates the relationship. The interest in Judaism usually predates or is independent from the relationship. We live in an America where 71% of non-Orthodox Jews marry non-Jews. 71%. Marrying a Jew is a minority choice. The intermarried are the vast majority. If you are choosing to go through a process of conversion, Remember, people who convert to Judaism are Jews, so they count not within the 71%, but within the 29%. If you are among the small percentage of people who go through a conversion before marriage, it's because there's some other reason than you're making your mother-in-law happy. It's a choice which has to be motivated by some deeper motivation, because where there isn't a deeper motivation, people just choose to intermarry. So I see person after person where she is converting before her wedding to Aaron Gold and Silver Bergenstein, but she's dated 16 other Jewish guys in her life, and she's sticking with Aaron of the very Jewish last name, and now she's going to convert, but she's been interested in this since she was 14 years old. I see that over and over again. So it's not a safe assumption to assume that just because a non-Jew is converting and is in a relationship with a Jew, that the Jew is driving the process. Quite often, the convert is driving the process, sometimes to the chagrin of the Jew. Right? Sometimes over the Jew's objection. So it's motivation, human motivation is complicated.
The question I asked you before, if a woman converts out of Judaism, but her children want to be Jewish, do they have to go through a conversion?
If the mother converts out of Judaism, means she was a Jew and she becomes something else prior to having children?
Depends on who you ask.
It depends on who you ask.
And the irony of the answer is it's not who you think. Okay, there is a law in the Talmud that says Yisrael afal pi shechet Yisrael. A Jewish person, no matter what they do, is always a Jewish person. Among the Orthodox, you are Jewish no matter what. You can convert out, you can sin, you can go to Costco Shabbos, it doesn't matter, you're Jewish. So in that case, the Jewish woman who converted out and had children, according to an Orthodox rabbi, her children are Jewish no matter what. Case in point. You all know that the Queen of England is Elizabeth. Her husband is Philip. They have a son named Charles. A bit of hilaria, but they have a son named Charles. Charles has a son named William. William is married to a woman named Kate Middleton. Kate Middleton's mother, Mrs. Middleton, her maiden name was Goldsmith. Goldsmith is the oldest Jewish family in England. In other words, Kate Middleton's mother, who identifies as an Episcopalian and prays as an Anglican, as an Episcopalian Anglican, prays in the Anglican Church. Kate Middleton, who was married in the Anglican Church, right? Kate Middleton, who is the mother of three children now. 3 children, the oldest of whom is, what's his name? Who will one day be the King of England. According to the Orthodox rabbinate, that child is Jewish. So after Charles comes William, after Williams comes George. King George of England, George the 7th, 8th, whatever he's going to be, is Jewish. He's Jewish. Now, that's the Orthodox. There was a case in Israel many years ago, I think 1956, about a young man who was rescued from the Holocaust by a monastery. His parents turned over the child to a monastery on their way to Auschwitz and said, "Watch my kid." They never came back. The monks converted the kid, raised him. When he got old enough, he became a Catholic priest. He joined the order. He's a monk. His name was Brother Daniel. He applied for citizenship in the state of Israel on the case that, even though he was a practicing Catholic priest, his mother was Jewish, and therefore he's Jewish. The Israeli Supreme Court took up the case. The Orthodox community filed an amicus brief on his behalf. He's right. He's Jewish. Says so in the Gemara. The Supreme Court of the State of Israel said, if you convert out and practice another faith, you're not Jewish anymore. So in this case, the less Orthodox considered him not Jewish. and the more Orthodox considered him Jewish. And you think that we conservative Jews have things upside down. So the answer to your question is, depends on which rabbi you ask, okay? Did I get that right? I think I got that.
I would ask you.
Yes. There you go. Okay, that was a good question. Who has the mic? And we'll call this the last question, Brian.
After that answer, I've got a headache.
Yeah, well,
that's all I have to say.
just imagine I just want you to keep in mind that King George of England will be, I'm going to send him a tallis when he gets crowned. I think he should know,
Anyway, thank you very much for an interesting presentation on an important topic.
I'm going to repeat the question because the microphone isn't great. Go ahead.
I'm curious if you have a visibility into the question of intermarriage. Is it good because it increases the likelihood of Jewish grandkids, or is it bad because it decreases the likelihood of Jewish grandkids?
Brian's question has to do with intermarriage. And is it good or bad for the Jews, for our future? And what is its impact on the community, if I could add the corollary?
This has to be the last question. The last question couldn't have been the last question. I don't think that we should talk about intermarriage as good or bad. I think we should talk about intermarriage as something which is. I'm not really sure what we gain by saying either intermarriage will be the death of all of us, or intermarriage is expanding the Jewish community beyond our wildest dreams. Both of things are things said by prominent Jewish institutions, well-funded Jewish institutions in the community. There are institutions which take both positions. I'm not terribly invested in either of those because I think intermarriage is. The clock will not go backwards. The world will not spin any direction but forwards. And we live in a world in which Jews are going to love people who are born Jewish, people who convert to Judaism, and people who are not Jewish. And so the only question is, if this is the case, and it is, then how do we live into that reality in a way that maximizes Jewish engagement and community? That's it. That's what we have the power over. Because if we are asking young person in love to choose between their commitment to the Jewish community and their commitment to the person who they love most in the world, the right answer for them, ladies and gentlemen, is to pick the person they love. Because if they wouldn't pick the person they love over all else, they shouldn't marry them. If we throw ourselves into that mix, if we give people a Sophie's choice, you can be with us or you can be with her or with him, they will pick her and him every single time. And so I do not believe that we should be framing the choice in that language, because we who care about Jewish continuity and community, will always lose in that exchange. I think instead we should be focused on the community as it is and figure out how we can make our institutions a place where that 71% of our community feels equally comfortable to the 29% who marry in. I would like to see the synagogue overflowing with diverse Jewish families, each and every one of whom says, I feel at home here. And if we do that, then I don't care so much about good or bad. I just care that we have done right by the people who made the choices that they make.
I want to thank Rabbi Greenwald for a lovely night. Well done. Next week, we'll have a debate with God, so come on back next week. This Shabbos, Cantor Israel Rand, world-class cantor from Israel, will be joining us. Have a great week, everyone. Be careful going home. Thank you. Really wonderful. You okay getting home this late? What? Should I call you an Uber?